Let's bring in Republican Congressman Walter Jones and Democratic Congressman from California, John Garamendi, who are both, by the way, members of the House Armed Services Committee. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. A lot of those questions was far-ranging, but quite a few of them dealing with Afghanistan, because we heard from the president just a few days ago now on what, he wants to take a new direction. But it still seems a little unclear. Let me begin with Congressman Jones. Is the war in Afghanistan winnable, and what does that win look like?
Well, no, and it's not a new direction. It's a continuation of a failed policy for 16 years. And I will tell you, I have the Camp Lejeune Marine Base in my district. I've talked to numerous Marines who have been there 5, 6, and 7 times, and you say, are we making any difference? And they say, no. You can't change a country that will never be a nation. And it's always said about Afghanistan, it is a graveyard of empires. And very quickly, we have spent well over $1 trillion. We have had 2,300 Americans killed. We were also 20,000 wounded, and we've gained nothing in 16 years but losing money, and more important than money, American lives.
Congressman Garamendi, the administration would argue that this is a critical part of the world because it serves as a safe haven, if you like, for many different terrorist cells. And in order to confront that, rather than just sit back here and defend, that we should be in Afghanistan to try and wipe out this menace. How would you respond to that?
That's exactly what we've been trying to do for 16 years with little to no success at all. In fact, it's become much worse in recent years for perhaps many, many reasons. The first reason is what Mr. Jones just talked about, and that is we do not understand Afghanistan. We seem to think that somehow military power is going to overcome the extraordinary history, long history, in that country of the various tribes holding to their particular part of that area and pushing outsiders out. We are an outsider. So there has to be a completely different strategy. The goal, which is never really clearly articulated, but if it is to prevent it from being a safe haven, then we'd better try a new strategy, because that goal has been in place for 16 years. The strategy that we have used for 16 years, which is military power, training, trying to build a democracy in Afghanistan, has simply failed. So I want to hear a new strategy, and more than anything, what Walter Jones and I want to do is to force the representatives of the American people, both in the Senate and the House, to come to grips with our responsibility, our constitutional responsibility, and that is to determine where and how and what we are waging war for.
All right, I want to switch gears and kind of go to another big pressing matter is, Congress, as we know, faces an October deadline to increase the government borrowing authority and to avoid defaulting on its debt. Also needs to pass a stopgap legislation to avert a government shutdown. There's an awful lot on the plate. Oh, by the way, repealing and replacing Obamacare, tax reform. There's an awful lot to do in a very short amount of time before these deadlines come. Mr. Garamendi, let me go back to you again on this. Sure. How are you going to get this done in the current environment?
Well, in the current environment, it won't get done if they try to do all of that. Like everything in life, we have to prioritize. What are the things that absolutely have to be done now? We know that the debt ceiling is upon us. That has to be done. We know the government has to be funded. Do we have to build a border wall? Absolutely, we do not. It's not going to make much difference in the long term, and it's not going to make any difference in the short term, other than to create a huge political crisis that could shut down the government and cause the American full faith and credit to disappear. And so is the border wall a priority? Well, maybe only in Trump's mind. And by the way, he promised the American people would not pay for it. That is a flip-flop that is going to be expensive if, in fact, we ever do build that border wall.
And you said, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked many questions along those lines. Why would you shut the U.S. government down if Mexico is going to pay for the border? Congressman Jones, what's your thoughts on the border wall and the comments from the president that, look, if I don't get the funding for this thing, I'll let the government shut down?
Well, real quickly, he's supporting so much wasted money in Afghanistan that he could save some of that money by not sending our troops over there and start spending the money here on the American people.
All right, but that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. I agree with you.
The wall itself is going to cost roughly, the preliminary estimates is $23 billion, and we're talking about raising the debt ceiling. How are we going to pay for it? If you want to do those kind of things, you probably need to raise taxes.
Well, following up, go ahead, Mr. Garamendi. Yep.
Well, Walter's correct about this. The expenditure of that money on a border wall is simply a waste of money for a wall that isn't going to serve its purpose. Clearly, we're wasting a lot of money in Afghanistan. Walter's quite correct about that. We're also wasting American lives. But beyond that, if you want to spend money and you want to deal with the safety of America, put the money into the U.S. Coast Guard. Almost all the drugs are coming through the oceans to our shores, and the U.S. Coast Guard is there. So there's just so many things we need to prioritize here. What is the most important priority? Clearly, the Congress has to come to grips with the Afghanistan war. We have failed for 16 years to really nail down how we're going to proceed, what is the strategy, what is the goal, and finally, as Walter just said, how are we going to pay for it? More debt? That seems to have been the answer.
We have a Democrat lawmaker, we have a Republican lawmaker, and they agree on things. That's kind of a rare thing these days.